3 pickup trucks kicked up dust along the winding road to Cedar Creek Farm in Wyoming's Wind River Valley, their engines growling with menace as they approached the weathered fence line. Sarah Anderson stood on her front porch, the morning sun catching the silver streaks in her auburn hair as she watched the vehicles approach through narrowed eyes. Her grandfather's old Remington rifle remained hidden, but close, propped just inside the doorway where it had stood guard for the past 20 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At her feet, Scout, her black and tan German shepherd, let out a low, warning growl. Sarah placed a steadying hand on his head, though her own muscles had tensed with the instinctive awareness that came from years of competitive shooting and law enforcement training. Her mind automatically calculated distances, angles, and potential cover positions, habits that hadn't faded in the 5 years since she'd left her position as the state's top marksmanship instructor to run this farm with her late husband, James. The lead truck's window rolled down, revealing a face she recognized from local warnings: Marcus "Deadeye" Reeves, leader of the Red Rock Raiders, a gang that had been terrorizing small farms across 3 counties. His scarred face twisted into what might have been meant as a smile as he surveyed her property, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator sizing up prey. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her mind was already mapping firing lines and cataloging details. The man in the passenger seat, whom locals called Twitch, had a poorly concealed shotgun across his lap. The muscular figure who emerged from the second truck moved with the telltale swagger of someone relying too heavily on the pistol obvious. Under his denim jacket, more importantly, she noted the fresh cuts on their hands and the distinct smell of livestock medication. They weren't just here to intimidate. The wind whispered through the aspen grove behind the house, carrying with it the scent of sage and early autumn. Sarah had always loved this valley, its rugged beauty and honest people. But in the past year, since James's death, something had changed. Small farms were being bought out under suspicious circumstances: equipment failures, mysterious fires, missing livestock, all followed by generous offers from shell companies that seemed to appear overnight. "Mrs. Anderson," Reeves called out, his voice carrying an edge that made the crisp morning air seem colder. "County Commissioner Jenkins sends his regards, says you missed last month's agricultural board meeting. He's concerned about your commitment to local interests." Sarah's hand remained steady on Scout's head, though her mind was already calculating the distance to her rifle. 20 years of competitive shooting had taught her patience, the ability to wait for the perfect moment. The raiders hadn't chosen this farm by accident. They'd been watching, testing, looking for weakness. They saw what they wanted to see: a widow struggling to maintain her husband's legacy, not the woman who'd once held the state record for long-distance rifle shooting. "Been busy with the harvest," Sarah replied evenly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence that had once commanded training ranges. "Tell Jenkins I appreciate his concern." Reeves stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel. "That's not good enough, Mrs. Anderson. Things are changing in Wind River Valley. The commissioner wants to ensure all local farms are properly protected." His gaze lingered on the aging barn, the faded paint of the farmhouse, especially those being run by someone on their own. The threat wasn't subtle. Sarah had seen the pattern emerging across the valley: small farms pushed to sell, their lands mysteriously consolidated under corporate names that all traced back to the same shell companies. The local police seemed curiously uninterested in investigating. "I managed just fine," Sarah said, her voice carrying the same steady calm she'd used to train countless shooters. "The commissioner should focus on actual governance instead of running errands for thugs." The farmyard went silent. Reeves's fake smile vanished, replaced by something uglier. "What did you just say to me?" Twitch slid out of the truck, shotgun now openly held, while the muscular man, she'd heard him called Buck, moved to flank his boss. Sarah didn't move, didn't give any outward sign of the tactical calculations running through her mind. The old grain silo offered the best, our cover, and she knew every inch of this land, every angle, every shadow. I said, Sarah spoke softly but clearly, that the commissioner should do his job. Reeves tried to close the distance, but Scout's deepening growl stopped him short. The German shepherd's training was evident, not attacking, not threatening, but presenting a clear, tactical barrier. Sarah hadn't spent years working with police K9 units without learning how to use a dog's presence to control a situation. "Lady, you have no idea who you're dealing with," Reeves snarled. Sarah's smile was cold, but didn't reach her eyes. "Actually, I do, Marcus Reeves. 3 warrants in Nevada, wanted for questioning in Colorado. The Red Rock Raiders have been running protection rackets across the state, but lately you've moved up to bigger operations. Those cuts on Buck's hands aren't from honest farm work. You're running something through the old Wilson livestock auction." The color drained from Reeves's face. Buck's hand twitched toward his pistol, but Sarah's stance shifted slightly, and Scout's growl kicked up a notch. They were starting to realize this wasn't going according to plan. "Here's what happens next," she continued, her voice carrying the same steady calm she'd used to talk shooters through their first competition. "You and your friends leave. We forget this happened, or we find out just how well a former state shooting champion and her trained K9 can defend their property. Your choice." For a long moment, nobody moved. The wind rustled through the aspens, carrying the scent of approaching rain from the mountains. Then Reeves raised his hands in apparent surrender, though his eyes had turned calculating. "All right, we're leaving," he said, backing toward his truck. "But this isn't over." "It can be," Sarah replied, maintaining her position as the raiders mounted up. "That's entirely up to you." As the trucks roared away in a cloud of dust, Sarah's mind was already racing through scenarios. She'd just painted a target on her back, but if her instincts were right, the cuts on their hands and the auction house connection pointed to something much bigger. The raiders were just muscle for a larger operation. Sarah scratched Scout behind the ears, the familiar gesture calming them both. "Good boy," she whispered. The German shepherd had been her constant companion since she'd retired from the shooting circuit, a reminder of her days training police units. The thought of James sent a familiar ache through her chest. He'd known about her shooting career, had even accompanied her to competitions, but he'd never fully understood the other side of her life, the tactical training she'd provided to law enforcement, the skills that went far beyond simply hitting a target. A familiar truck appeared on the horizon, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who knew the territory. Sarah recognized Bill Mitchell's old Ford, the retired sheriff, who'd become her closest neighbor and ally since James's death. The weathered lawman got out, his expression grim as he leaned against his truck's hood. "Saw the raiders heading out," he said. "Figured I should check on you." "I'm fine," Sarah replied, but her tactical mind was already processing new information. "Bill, what do you know about Wilson's livestock auction?" Mitchell's expression darkened. "Used to be straight as an arrow when old Jack Wilson ran it. Since his nephew took over and got cozy with the commissioner's office, things have changed. Lots of stock moving through at odd hours. Paperwork that doesn't quite add up." Sarah nodded, pieces falling into place. The missing cattle from the Peterson and Martinez ranches had disappeared right after they'd refused to sell. The local police had found nothing, of course. Her phone buzzed with a message from a number she hadn't seen in years. "Satellite imagery shows suspicious activity at Wilson Auction House. Multiple organized crime connections. Support available if needed. Thompson." The pieces were falling into place. The raiders weren't just working for corrupt local officials. They were muscle for an organized crime syndicate using the auction house to move stolen livestock across state lines. The accidents at local farms, the pressure to sell, it was all part of a larger operation. I need to know everything about that auction house, Sarah said. Entry points, security, staff movements. Mitchell studied her for a long moment, recognition dawning in his eyes. You're not just James's widow, are you? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Let's just say I've dealt with operations like this before, but I need to understand what we're up against. Your son still works security at the auction house, doesn't he? The old sheriff nodded slowly, the familiar law enforcement instincts showing through. Tommy's been documenting everything he can. The raiders handle their muscle work, but there's something bigger going on. Professional buyers, high-end stock disappearing into unmarked trailers at midnight. He's tracked shipments heading north into Montana, south into Colorado. I need his intel, Sarah replied, her mind already formulating plans. Security at the auction house would be substantial, but she'd breached better protected facilities during her days training tactical units. More importantly, she understood how organizations like this operated. They'd be expecting resistance from law enforcement, not a precision shooter who knew how to disappear into the landscape. Her phone buzzed again. Thompson's satellite data showed increased activity at the auction house. Multiple vehicles arriving, professional security patterns. They were preparing for something significant. They'll come after you now, Mitchell warned, his voice carrying the weight of decades. In law enforcement, once they realize you're a threat, they'll send professionals. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sarah checked her rifles. With practiced efficiency, Scout alert at her side. Good, let them come. But first, we need to talk to someone who sees everything that moves through that auction house. The raiders might keep their secrets from law enforcement, but they talk freely around the office staff. Mitchell's eyes widened. Nancy Wilson, Jack's daughter, still runs the books even after her cousin took over. Been there 30 years. Then let's pay Nancy a visit, Sarah said, already moving toward her truck. The familiar weight of her competition rifle in its case was reassuring. She sent a brief response to Thompson. Stand by, recon only. Wind River Valley is about to get interesting. The Wilson livestock auction occupied the outskirts of Cedar Creek, its weathered buildings casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Sarah positioned her truck with a clear view of both exits, noting the security cameras. These ones functional, covering the main entrance. Mitchell parked his Ford in the shadows, while Scout maintained silent watchfulness from the back seat. The office door chimed as Sarah entered. Nancy Wilson looked up from her computer, her silver-rimmed glasses and neat appearance giving her a professional demeanor that didn't quite mask the sharp intelligence in her eyes. At this hour, only 2 other people occupied the office, both wearing Red Rock Raiders patches, both trying too hard to look casual. Coffee? Nancy asked, already pouring a cup. Best in the valley. Her voice carried the weight of decades spent watching Wind River Valley's transformation. Sarah slid into a chair, positioning herself to watch the raiders in the reflection of the office window. Heard you make good apple pie too. Only person who makes it better is my mother. God rest her soul. Used to be simpler times, Nancy replied, her voice dropping as the raiders gathered their papers. One brushed deliberately close to Sarah as they left, attempting intimidation. She didn't bother turning around. Once their motorcycles roared away, Nancy's demeanor changed completely. Bill called ahead, she said quietly. Said you might have questions about our recent changes. Sarah sipped her coffee. It was excellent. Tell me about the night operations. 3 months ago, my cousin Patrick partnered with some new investors. Now we're moving stock at all hours. Expensive trailers, professional handlers. The kind of security you'd expect from moving gold bars, not cattle. Nancy's hands trembled slightly. Last month I recognized one of the horses, Peterson's prize stallion, the one that supposedly died in that mysterious barn fire. Mitchell joined them, his deputy reserve badge now visible. How deep does it go, Nancy? Deep enough that Patrick won't let me near the main records anymore, but I've been keeping my own books. She pulled out a thumb drive. They're moving livestock from ranches across 5 states, using our reputation to launder stolen animals through legitimate auctions. The raiders provide security, handle any problems that arise. Sarah's phone vibrated. Thompson's message was brief but telling. Satellite confirms major transport operations. Professional security rotation pattern matches organized crime livestock theft ring operating out of Canada. They're moving products south. They're using the old cattle trails, Nancy continued, the ones that run through national forest land, perfect for moving stock without detection. Patrick has some of the Forest Service in his pocket. They look the other way. The commissioner? Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. Jenkins has been dirty for years, Mitchell spat. Ever since his brother got involved with the raiders. Now half the county government is either on the payroll or too scared to act. Nancy placed another file on the desk. 2 days ago, I overheard Patrick on the phone. Something big's coming. They're clearing the auction schedule, posting extra security. Mentioned someone called the Handler arriving to inspect the operation. Sarah went still. The Handler, a name she'd heard during her time training federal tactical units, a major player in international livestock theft, known for making examples of anyone who interfered with operations. His reputation had been one of the reasons she'd left law, enforcement for what she'd hoped would be a quieter life. When? She asked quietly. 3 days. They're having a big auction that night, mandatory attendance for all major ranches in the valley. Nancy leaned forward. Perfect cover while they move whatever they don't want seen. Suddenly, Mitchell's radio crackled to life. Multiple vehicles approaching from the north, professional formation, SUVs and bikes. Sarah moved to the window. 4 black SUVs led by Red Rock Raiders were making their way down the main road. The lead vehicle stopped outside the auction house. Nancy, does the office still connect to the old storage barn? Sarah asked quickly. The older woman smiled, gesturing toward a door behind the filing cabinets. Barn connects to the back pasture. Mitchell, get Nancy out. I'll draw their attention. Sarah checked her sidearm with practiced precision. Scout, with me. Like old times, Mitchell asked, his voice steady despite the tension. Something like that. Sarah triggered a small device on her belt, a gift from her law enforcement days. Every security camera in the complex went dark simultaneously. The office door chimed as heavy boots entered. Told you this wasn't over, Reeves's voice carried across the empty room. Boss wants to talk. Sarah didn't turn around. Your boss. Could make an appointment. I'm finishing my coffee. More footsteps entered, professional operators by their movement patterns. Not typical gang muscle, but private security contractors. This situation was escalating rapidly. Not a request, lady, one of the contractors spoke, though I've got to admit, you've got nerve. Not many people stand up to the raiders in their own territory. Sarah turned, studying them with cold amusement. This isn't raider territory, not anymore. Wind River Valley belongs to its people. You're just parasites who haven't figured out you're dying yet. Take her, Reeves ordered. Sarah smiled. Sometimes the best operations started with letting the enemy think they had the upper hand. As the contractors moved forward, she calculated angles, positions, and the exact pressure points that would cause maximum damage with minimal effort. The first contractor never saw the coffee pot coming. Sarah launched it in a fluid motion, scalding liquid and ceramic, creating instant chaos as he staggered back. She was already moving, years of competitive shooting having honed her body into a precision instrument. Scout burst into action beside her, his police K-9 training evident in every calculated move. The second contractor reached for his concealed weapon, but found his arm locked in a joint manipulation that sent him crashing into Reeves. The third made the mistake of telegraphing a wide punch. Sarah slipped inside his guard, using his momentum to drive him through a desk. Professional security? she taunted, flowing between them like water. "You move like mall cops." Two more. Contractors burst through the door, these ones openly carrying weapons. Sarah dove behind an overturned filing cabinet as bullets splintered wood and shattered coffee mugs. Scout had already flanked them, his powerful jaws finding one contractor's weapon arm with brutal precision. "You're trapped," Buck called out. "No way out except through us." Sarah pulled a small device from her jacket, another remnant of her law enforcement days. "Actually," she replied, "you're the ones who are trapped." She triggered the device. Every light in the office exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the room into darkness. The contractor's tactical light snapped on, exactly what she'd anticipated. In the dark, they became perfect targets. Moving silently, Sarah emerged. Behind them, the first contractor went down to a precise strike to the brainstem. The second spun, firing wildly, but she was already gone. The third found himself disarmed and unconscious before he registered her presence. Reeves backed toward the door, drawing a knife. "What the hell are you?" "Someone who's dealt with better criminals than you," Sarah replied, her voice seeming to come from everywhere in the darkness. "Tell your boss, the real one, not Jenkins, that Wind River Valley isn't his playground anymore." "The handler will gut you," Reeves snarled, still trying to locate her. "He's handled sharpshooters before." "I know," Sarah's voice hardened. "I was there." Before Reeves could respond, she struck 3 precise hits that left him gasping on the floor. As police sirens wailed in the distance, she retrieved her phone, snapping photos of the contractors. "EDs, Thompson would be able to trace their connections." Mitchell's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Local police are incoming. Jenkins is leading them personally." Sarah surveyed the unconscious contractors. "Time to disappear. Meet at Fallback Point Alpha." She whistled softly and Scout appeared at her side, both of them slipping into the storage room as Jenkins's vehicle screeched into the parking lot. The passage to the barn was narrow but navigable, clearly part of the original ranch's design. Sarah moved silently through the darkness, her mind already processing the night's intelligence. The handler's impending arrival changed everything. He'd recognize her, know what she was capable of. Her phone vibrated. Thompson again. "Satellite. Shows major movement at the auction house. They're accelerating operations. Teams standing by." "Not yet," she replied. "Let them think they're in control. I need 48 hours to set the board." The passage emerged in the old barn as promised. Mitchell was waiting with his truck engine idling. As they pulled away, Sarah could hear Jenkins's angry voice. "Find her! I want this whole valley locked down." "My son sent this," Mitchell said once they were clear, handing her a thumb drive. "Security rotations, delivery schedules, everything he's documented over the past month." Sarah plugged the drive into her phone. The operation was even bigger than she'd suspected. The auction house was just one node in a massive network moving stolen livestock across North America. The handler wasn't coming just to deal with her. He was coming to expand the operation. Jenkins called an emergency ranchers meeting. Mitchell reported as they drove. "They're spooked. Reeves wasn't supposed to engage directly, especially not with contractors present. They've exposed their hands too early." Sarah studied the security schedules. The auction house's defenses were extensive, but she'd breached better. More importantly, she knew how the handler thought, how he'd react. He'd want to make an example of her, just like he had with other threats to his operation. "Mitchell, I need every detail about this auction, security, attendance, everything." The old lawman nodded. "They're requiring all major ranchers present, using the main auction arena, single central room, 2 exits. They'll use it as cover while they move something big through the back pastures." Or someone, Sarah mused, thinking of the handler, of the brutality she'd witnessed during her last encounter with his organization. "Get your trusted deputies ready, but quietly. For now, we let Jenkins think he's got control of the situation." Sarah's eyes hardened as They drove through the darkness. In 3 days, they'd learn why you never bring organized crime operations to a valley protected by a former marksmanship champion. The handler was coming, bringing his expertise in terror and enforcement, but he'd find more than small-town prey. Waiting in the Wyoming night, he'd find a predator who'd learned from past mistakes, one who now hunted criminals with the same precision she'd once used to win shooting competitions. Mitchell's truck wound through the back roads, avoiding the main highways where Jenkins's deputies would be setting up checkpoints. Sarah's mind raced with calculations, distances, angles, wind patterns. The auction house's security might be extensive, but every fortress had its weaknesses. More importantly, she knew the land, knew every ridge and valley that could provide a shooting position. "They're bringing in more muscle," Mitchell said, checking his phone. "My contacts in law enforcement say there's heavy vehicle traffic coming. In from Utah and Montana, professional operators, not just gang members." "They're preparing for war," Sarah replied, "but they're preparing for the wrong kind of fight. They think this is about force, about overwhelming firepower. They don't understand that at 1,000 yards, a single skilled shooter can control an entire battlefield." Her phone lit up with surveillance photos from Thompson. Vehicles entering the valley, faces she recognized from federal watch lists. The handler was calling in his elite forces, men who specialized in making problems disappear. But they were used to operating in cities, in places where long sightlines were rare and precision shooting was limited by urban terrain. "Wind River Valley isn't their kind of battlefield," Sarah said quietly. "Out here, every ridge is a sniper's nest, every valley a kill zone. They're walking into territory that was made for someone with my particular set of skills." Mitchell studied her profile in the darkness. "You've been planning for something like this, haven't you, since you first moved here with James?" Sarah's hand unconsciously touched the wedding ring she still wore. "I chose this valley for a reason. The terrain, the sightlines. It's perfect for precision shooting. I told James it was for practice, for keeping my skills sharp, but really I was building myself a fortress, a place where I could control any engagement. And now the enemy is walking right into your kill zone," Mitchell said, understanding dawning in his voice. "Exactly," Sarah replied, a cold smile touching her lips. "They think they're coming to lay siege to a farming community. Instead, they're walking into a sharpshooter's paradise. Every pasture, every ridgeline, every abandoned barn. I've mapped them all, calculated the ranges, logged the wind patterns. This valley isn't just my home, it's my shooting gallery." Mitchell pulled off onto a concealed mountain road, the truck's headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. "There's something else you should know," he said, his voice grave. "Before Tommy started documenting the auction house operations, he noticed something peculiar about their security setup." Sarah turned her full attention to the former sheriff, recognizing the tone of someone about to share crucial intelligence. "They've been installing high-end surveillance equipment, military-grade motion sensors. But here's the strange part. They're all focused on ground-level approaches. Nobody's watching the high ground." A predatory smile crossed Sarah's face. "Because they're thinking like urban criminals. In cities, height advantage means buildings, and buildings can be controlled. Out here," she gestured to the rugged landscape around them, barely visible in the fading light. "Out here, there are 100 natural shooting positions that can't be secured, can't be monitored." Her phone buzzed again. Thompson had sent thermal imaging data from the auction house, heat signatures showing patrol patterns, guard rotations, and blind spots in their security setup. She studied the data with the same meticulous attention she'd once given to wind charts and ballistic tables during competitions. "Look at this," she said, showing Mitchell the screen. "They've got 3 layers of perimeter security, all focused on preventing close-range infiltration. But from the ridge, 2 miles east of the auction house, perfect line of sight to their entire operation," Mitchell finished, his military experience showing through. But 2 miles, that's an impossible shot. Sarah's expression hardened. Not impossible. Challenging, yes. Variables to account for, wind speed, temperature, bullet drop, Coriolis effect. But I didn't win the National Long-Range Championship for 3 years running by taking easy shots. She pulled out a small notebook from her jacket pocket, its pages filled with detailed calculations and topographical notes. I've been documenting every significant position in this valley since the day I moved here. Range cards for multiple elevations, weather pattern notes, seasonal wind variations. James thought I was just being thorough with my practice routines. You were preparing for war, Mitchell said quietly. I was preparing for the possibility, Sarah corrected. 15 years in competitive shooting taught me one thing. The moment you stop preparing is the moment you lose everything. The truck crested a rise, revealing a small cabin nestled into the mountainside. To casual observers, it would appear to be just another hunting lodge. But as Mitchell pulled to a stop, Sarah was already moving toward a concealed entrance on the building's northern face. Welcome to my actual practice range, she said, entering a code into a hidden keypad. The door opened silently, revealing a space that was part armory, part tactical operations center. High-end spotting scopes lined one wall, while custom rifles, each built to her exact specifications, rested in secure racks. All legal, she added, noting Mitchell's expression. Every weapon registered, every modification documented. I just never advertised my enthusiasm for the sport. A bank of monitors showed feeds from discrete cameras positioned throughout the valley, while weather stations provided real-time data on conditions affecting long-range shooting. This wasn't just a practice facility. It was a command center, designed for precisely the kind of operation they now faced. The handler thinks he's coming to inspect a simple criminal enterprise, Sarah said, activating the main computer system. Instead, he's walking into an ambush 5 years in the making. Every elevation advantage, every concealed position, every escape route, I've mapped them all. She pulled up detailed schematics of the auction house and surrounding terrain. But we need to be smart about this. The handler's reputation isn't built on empty threats. He'll have contingency plans, professional security teams with serious combat experience. Which is why we strike from where they least expect it, Mitchell said, studying the topographical displays. From distances they consider impossible. Sarah nodded, her fingers dancing across the keyboard as she compiled data from multiple sources. Thompson's satellite intel confirms what we suspected. They're bringing in their elite cleanup crews, men who specialize in making problems disappear. But they're trained for urban warfare, for close-quarters combat. Out here you can reach out and touch them from a mile away, Mitchell finished, a grim smile crossing his weathered face. Exactly. Sarah brought up another screen, this one showing wind pattern analyses for the valley. But first, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. The handler doesn't travel light, and he doesn't take chances. When he arrives, he'll have multiple security layers, escape routes, probably air support. Her phone chimed with an encrypted message from Thompson. Handler's advance team includes former Special Forces snipers. They're setting up counter-sniper positions around the auction house. Sarah's smile turned predatory. Now that's interesting. They're finally thinking about the high ground, but they're still playing by urban rules. In the city, you only need to control certain buildings, certain angles. Out here, she gestured to the surrounding wilderness. Out here, there are 1,000 places to take a shot, and they can't watch them all. Mitchell studied the tactical displays, his law enforcement experience adding another layer to their planning. The auction will give them cover for moving, significant resources. Local ranchers are required to attend, providing a civilian shield for whatever they're really doing. Classic misdirection, Sarah agreed, but it also gives us an opportunity. While everyone's focused on the main event, we can position our assets without drawing attention, Mitchell finished. My deputies can Sarah held up a hand, her expression serious. "No, the fewer people involved, the better. Your deputies can help with evacuation if needed, but the actual operation needs to be surgical. One shooter, key positions, maximum effect." She turned to a rifle case mounted on the wall, her fingers running along its edges with familiar reverence. Inside lay her pride and joy, a custom-built rifle that had helped her set 3 state records for long-distance shooting. The handler's men will be looking for a tactical response, multiple shooters, coordinated attacks. They won't be expecting one person who can turn this entire valley into a shooting gallery. Her voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades perfecting their craft. Sometimes the most effective weapon isn't an army, it's a single expert who knows the terrain and has nothing left to lose. Dawn painted the Wind River peaks in shades of amber as Sarah Anderson made her final calculations. Through her spotting scope, she watched the auction house come to life, noting how the security teams changed their patrol patterns with the rising sun. 4 new guard positions had been established overnight, each manned by professionals who clearly understood tactical positioning, but they were still focusing on the wrong threats. "Range to target?" Mitchell asked, lying prone beside her on the ridgeline, his own binoculars trained on the facility below. 2,300. "Yards to the main entrance," Sarah replied, making a notation in her range book. "Wind at 6 miles per hour, quartering from the northwest. Temperature 48 degrees Fahrenheit, barometric pressure steady." She paused, calculating. "At this distance, bullet drop is significant, approximately 42 feet. Flight. Time is roughly 3 seconds, the former sheriff whistled softly. "That's beyond extreme range for most shooters." "Most shooters aren't equipped for it," Sarah agreed, gesturing to the custom rifle beside her. "Match-grade barrel, carbon fiber stock, advanced ballistic computer, but more importantly," she tapped her range book, 5 years of documented shots from this exact position under every weather condition imaginable. Her phone vibrated with an update from Thompson. The satellite imagery showed 3 new vehicles arriving at the auction house, unmarked SUVs with diplomatic plates, a clear sign that the handler's advance team was establishing their operational base. "They're setting up counter-sniper positions," Mitchell observed, noting the movement of equipment to elevated positions around the facility. "Professional gear, thermal imaging, probably acoustic shot detection systems," Sarah smiled coldly. "All excellent tools in the right environment, but they're calibrated for urban warfare, for shots taken from buildings at normal engagement. Distances out here," she gestured to the vast landscape. "The wind alone will play havoc with their acoustic sensors. And thermal imaging? Useless beyond a certain range, especially with the temperature variations in these mountains." The rising sun caught something metallic at the auction house, a sniper team setting up on the roof. Sarah studied them through her scope, analyzing their equipment and positioning. "They're good," she admitted. "Military training, probably. Special forces background, but they're defending against what they know, not what they're actually facing." Mitchell shifted position, pulling out a tablet displaying the auction house blueprints his son had provided. Tommy confirmed they're converting the main arena for the big event, reinforcing access points, installing additional security measures. "But look at this." He pointed to a section of the plans. "The old ventilation system runs through the entire complex. They've blocked the main ducts, but the maintenance access points could provide firing lines nobody expects," Sarah finished, already calculating angles. "More importantly, they'll affect airflow through the building. At extreme range, even small atmospheric variations can make the difference between a hit and a miss." Her phone chimed again. Another message from Thompson. "Handler's security detail includes former Delta Force operators. They're bringing in specialized equipment, including anti-sniper acoustic arrays and thermal detection systems. Value estimated at over 5 million. Sarah's laugh held no humor. They really don't understand what they're up against. All that technology, all that expensive gear, it's designed to counter military snipers operating under standard conditions. But competitive shooting. She shook her head. That's a different game entirely. We shoot under conditions that would make military trainers blanch. 1,000-yard shots in gusting winds, extreme angle compensation, multiple weather variables. A convoy of trucks appeared on the horizon, moving with military precision toward the auction house. Sarah tracked them through her scope, noting details. Armor-plated vehicles, run-flat tires, electronic countermeasure equipment. They're not taking any chances. That's the handler's style, Mitchell agreed. Overwhelming force, maximum security. In urban environments, it makes him virtually untouchable. But this isn't his environment, Sarah replied, making another notation in her range book. Look at their vehicle positioning. Standard defensive formation, perfect for city streets. Out here, it just makes them predictable. She pulled out a laptop, bringing up a detailed weather forecast. The day of the auction, we're expecting high pressure moving in from the northwest. Temperature will drop, affecting bullet velocity. Wind patterns will shift. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, inputting data into a ballistic calculator. Most shooters would see these conditions as problematic. For us, they're an advantage. Mitchell studied the calculations appearing on the screen. You've been preparing for this kind of scenario specifically, haven't you? All those hours on the range, all those meticulous records. Sarah nodded, her expression distant. After James died, I knew they'd eventually come for the farm. The pattern was too clear. Small properties being pressured to sell, mysterious accidents, criminal, organizations moving in. So I started preparing, not just practicing marksmanship, but studying every aspect of this valley, every ridgeline, every weather pattern, every possible shooting position. Her phone displayed another update from Thompson, this one including thermal images of the auction house interior. New security systems were being installed, cutting-edge technology designed to detect and prevent any threat, at least any threat they could anticipate. Look at their blind spots, Sarah indicated, pointing to areas the new systems couldn't effectively cover. They're thinking in terms of standard engagement distances, normal tactical approaches. Nobody considers the possibility of shots from extreme range because, technically, they should be impossible. She opened another case, revealing specialized ammunition. Match-grade rounds, hand-loaded to my exact specifications. Each batch tested under varying conditions, performance documented. She held up one round. The bullet itself is designed for extreme range stability. Most people don't realize that at these distances, even the rotation of the Earth affects the shot. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. The Coriolis effect? At these ranges? It's measurable, Sarah confirmed. Approximately 3 inches of drift at 2,000 yards. Not much, but at these distances, every variable matters. That's what separates competitive shooting from military sniping. We account for everything, no matter how small. A helicopter appeared in the distance, approaching the auction house with deliberate purpose. Sarah tracked it through her scope. Private security contractors' aircraft. They're establishing air support, probably equipped with thermal imaging and night vision capabilities. They're creating a fortress, Mitchell observed. They're creating a cage, Sarah corrected. Every security measure, every defensive position. They're all designed to protect against threats moving in. Nobody's watching for threats already in position. She gestured to their hidden observation post. From here, I can see every approach, every security position, every potential target. More importantly, I can engage from distances their equipment isn't designed to detect. Her phone vibrated with an encrypted message. Final confirmation. Handler arrives in 48 hours. Full security detail, including electronic warfare capabilities and counter-sniper teams. Ghost unit standing by on your order. Sarah studied the message, then turned to Mitchell. We need to accelerate our timeline. The handler's bringing in electronic warfare equipment. They'll try to jam communications, disable security systems, and create confusion. We can use that. How? Because they'll be focused on protecting their own communications, their own tactical networks. They won't be watching for older, simpler methods. She pulled out a set of hand signals charts. These were standard for competitive shooting teams. Visual communications that work at extreme range. No electronics, nothing to jam or intercept. Mitchell absorbed the information, his law enforcement experience adding another layer to their planning. And your shooting positions? Already prepared, Sarah replied, bringing up a topographical map marked with carefully plotted locations. 5 primary positions, each offering different advantages depending on weather conditions. More importantly, each position has multiple escape routes that can't be monitored or blocked. She indicated specific points on the map. These 3 ridgelines provide optimal firing solutions to the auction house's main entrance. These 2 positions here and here cover the emergency exits and loading docks. From any of these positions, I can effectively control movement throughout the entire facility. Her phone displayed another satellite update from Thompson. The auction house was now surrounded by a sophisticated security perimeter, motion sensors, infrared cameras, armed patrols. The handler's advance team was leaving nothing to chance. They're following standard counter-sniper protocols, Sarah observed, studying the defensive positions. Establishing overlapping fields of fire, securing high ground, implementing electronic surveillance. All excellent procedures for dealing with military threats, but competitive shooting? She shook her head. That's a different discipline entirely. We regularly make shots that military snipers consider practically impossible, under conditions that would ground most tactical operations. Mitchell watched as she made another series of calculations in her range book. You're not just planning to defend against them, are you? You're going to dismantle their entire operation. 1 shot at a time, Sarah confirmed, her voice carrying the same steady calm she'd used to win national championships. They think they're preparing for a tactical engagement. Instead, they're walking into a precision shooting exhibition, and they've just given me the perfect stage to demonstrate why competitive marksmanship is in a class of its own. Scouts' ears perked up as a distant vehicle approached their observation post. Sarah and Mitchell quickly packed their equipment, but relaxed when they recognized Tommy Mitchell's distinctive Jeep winding up the mountain road. The younger Mitchell emerged from his vehicle carrying a thick folder. His time-working security at the auction house had left dark circles under his eyes, but his movements remained sharp, alert. You need to see this, he said, spreading documents across the hood of his Jeep. They're bringing in specialized ballistic shields for the handler's security detail, rated to stop anything up to 50 caliber. Multiple layers of protection, including reactive armor. Sarah studied the specifications with professional interest. Impressive equipment, designed for urban warfare, close-quarter protection. But out here, she gestured to the vast landscape. At extreme ranges, the angle of impact changes everything. Those shields are rated for direct hits at standard distances. Nobody plans for shots coming in at steep angles from 2,000 yards. Tommy nodded, pulling out more documents. That's not all. They've contracted a private security firm that specializes in VIP protection. These guys have guarded heads of state, operated in war zones. Their counter-sniper protocols are supposedly unbeatable. In their environment, Sarah corrected, making new notations in her range book. Look at their standard operating procedures, all based on urban tactical doctrine. Maximum effective range calculations, response protocols, even their equipment. Loadout. It's all optimized for city operations. Mitchell studied the security firm's documentation. They're bringing in mobile command centers, electronic warfare suites, even counter-UAV systems, turning the auction house into a technological fortress. And that's their weakness, Sarah replied, her expression thoughtful. They're relying on technology, on modern tactical doctrine. But long-range competitive shooting, that's almost a 19th century art form combined with 21st century physics. She opened another case, revealing specialized environmental monitoring equipment. These sensors measure everything: temperature gradients, humidity, barometric pressure changes. In competition, we use this data to make shots that most people consider impossible. The military trains snipers to engage targets at 800 to 1,200 yards. Competitive shooters, we regularly compete at ranges beyond 1,500 yards. Tommy's eyes widened as he looked through Sarah's range book. These calculations, you've been documenting shot conditions for years. Every day, every weather pattern. Knowledge beats technology, Sarah explained, setting up a portable weather station. All their fancy equipment, all their tactical protocols, they're designed to counter known threats. But they've never encountered someone who treats extreme range shooting as an exact science. Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The auction house security teams were conducting rehearsals, running through various threat scenarios. Sarah watched their movements with professional interest. Look at their response patterns, she indicated. Standard counter-sniper protocols. If they detect a threat, they'll expect the shooter to relocate immediately. That's military doctrine. Shoot and move. But in competition, she smiled coldly, we learn to hold position, to adjust for changing conditions, to make impossible shots repeatedly. They're preparing to chase a ghost, not realizing they're actually facing something far more dangerous. A shooter who doesn't need to move. Chill. Pointed to the auction house blueprints. They've fortified every entrance, every window. The handler will be surrounded by layers of security at all times, which means they'll be focused on close protection, Sarah noted, making more calculations. Their entire security model is based on controlling the immediate environment. They won't be looking for threats beyond their perceived maximum effective range. She brought up a ballistic calculator on her laptop, inputting data from multiple sources. At extreme ranges, shooting becomes pure mathematics. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, Earth's rotation, even the curvature of the Earth. Everything affects the bullet's path. Most security teams don't even consider these factors because, in their world, such shots are theoretical. Tommy laid out more intelligence from the auction house. They're planning to move something big during the event. Multiple transport vehicles staged at secure locations, specialized handling equipment. Whatever it is, they're treating it like a military-grade shipment. Of course they are, Sarah replied, studying the vehicle staging areas through her scope. The auction is just cover for their real operation. They'll use the crowd of legitimate ranchers as camouflage while they move. Their actual cargo. She made another notation. And they've just given us their timeline, their movement patterns, everything we need. Her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from Thompson. Handler's security detail conducting advanced site survey. They're mapping every building, every sightline within a mile of the target. Sarah's laugh held no humor. A mile. They think a mile is beyond effective range. They don't realize they're dealing with someone who sees a mile as a warm-up distance. She turned to the Mitchells, her expression serious. We're going to let them establish their security, let them believe they've created an impenetrable defense. Then we're going to demonstrate why competitive shooting at extreme ranges is the ultimate equalizer. She began breaking down her observation equipment with practiced efficiency. They're bringing in the best security money can buy, the latest technology and proven tactical doctrine, but they're preparing for a type of warfare that doesn't apply out here. In these mountains with these distances, she patted her custom rifle. Pure marksmanship beats tactical doctrine every time. Twilight descended over Wind River Valley as Sarah Anderson made her final adjustments to the hidden observation post on Eagle Ridge. Through her spotting scope, she watched the auction house transform into a fortress. New security teams moved with military precision, installing equipment that turned the old building into a technological stronghold. But their preparations revealed more than they concealed. Fresh intel from my contacts in local law enforcement, Tommy reported, joining her at the observation point. 6 more vehicles crossed the county line an hour ago. European plates, diplomatic credentials. They're staging at different locations, coordinating their movements. The handler's personal security detail, Sarah confirmed, studying the new arrivals through her scope. See how they position their vehicles. Counter-ambush formation, advanced protective tactics. These aren't just hired guns, they're elite operators. Her phone lit up with an encrypted file from Thompson. Satellite imagery revealed a complex network of security measures being implemented around the auction house. Mobile surveillance units, signal jammers, even counter-sniper. Drones patrolling the perimeter. They're establishing a multi-layered defense, Mitchell observed, examining the data. Each team operated independently, but coordinated through a central command structure. Military-grade communications, encrypted channels, and every single. A layer designed to protect against conventional threats, Sarah added, making notes in a fresh page of her range book. The leather-bound volume contained years of data. Not just shooting records, but detailed analyses of how different atmospheric conditions affected bullet performance at extreme ranges. Tommy spread out new blueprints across their mobile command station. The main arena's been completely retrofitted. Bulletproof glass, reinforced walls, multiple escape routes. They've even installed some kind of electronic countermeasure system in the rafters. Sarah's expression remained focused as she studied the modifications. All excellent precautions for close-range protection, but they're still thinking like urban operators. She pointed to specific areas on the blueprints. Look at these sight lines. They've blocked every direct angle of fire, secured all the obvious shooting positions, but at an extreme range, the geometry changes completely. Her phone displayed another update from Thompson. Handler's advanced team conducting final security sweeps. They're using ground-penetrating radar, thermal imaging, even seismic sensors to detect any approaching threats. Impressive technology, Mitchell commented, watching the teams work through high-powered binoculars. Top-of-the-line equipment best money can buy, and all of it calibrated for standard engagement distances, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering their craft. You know what the difference is between military sniping and competitive shooting? Military snipers train to be good enough. Competition shooters, we train until it's mathematically impossible to be better. She opened a specialized case, revealing custom-made ammunition gleaming in the fading light. These rounds were handcrafted for shots beyond 2,000 yards. The bullets are machined to tolerances finer than a human hair, powder charges measured to 1/10 of a grain. In competition, this level of precision is the difference between winning and losing. Out here, she gestured to the vast landscape, it's the difference between impossible and inevitable. Tommy studied the ammunition with professional interest. I've never seen rounds like these before. Because they don't exist anywhere else, Sarah explained. Custom design, developed through years of competition experience. The military uses standardized ammunition because they need reliability across different weapons and conditions. But for a single shooter, with a single rifle, pushing the absolute limits of what's possible. She held up one round. This is what happens when ballistic science meets obsessive perfectionism. Her phone chimed with new intelligence. Thompson's satellites had detected increased activity at small airfields across 3 states. Private jets landing, helicopters being prepped for flight. The handler's bringing in his entire operation, Mitchell observed. not just security, but his whole organization, using the auction as cover to establish a new base of operations. "Because he thinks he's invulnerable," Sarah replied, making more notations in her range book. "His security teams, his technology, his tactical doctrine, it's all proven effective against traditional threats. But they've never faced someone who treats extreme range shooting as an exact science." She brought up historical weather data on her laptop, comparing it with current conditions. "Tomorrow's forecast shows a high-pressure system moving in. Temperature will drop, affecting bullet velocity. Wind patterns will shift." Her fingers flew over the keyboard, inputting data into specialized ballistic software. Most shooters would see these conditions as problematic. For us, they're variables to be calculated, understood, exploited. Tommy laid out more intelligence, gathered from his position inside the auction house. "They're requiring all local ranchers to attend tomorrow night's auction. Mandatory participation, no exceptions. But the main cargo, whatever they're really moving, that happens during the event, using the crowd as cover." "Classic misdirection," Mitchell added. "Keep everyone focused on the legitimate auction while their real operation proceeds unnoticed." Sarah's smile held no warmth, except they don't realize they've given us exactly what we need: their timeline, their movement patterns, their security protocols. We need to turn their own plan against them. She opened another case, this one containing specialized optics. "These aren't just scopes," she explained, removing a particularly advanced piece of equipment. "They're precision measuring instruments. In competition, we use them to read mirage, the heat waves that show wind conditions between us and the target. Most tactical operators don't even consider mirage at their operating distances. At 2,000 yards, it's as important as wind speed." Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The auction house security teams were conducting their final rehearsals, running through various threat scenarios with military precision. "Look at their response patterns," Sarah indicated. "If they detect a threat, they'll expect multiple shooters, coordinated attacks, standard military doctrine. They're preparing to deal with a tactical team." She shook her head. "They don't understand that at extreme ranges, a single skilled shooter can control an entire battlefield. Every shot is a mathematical equation: wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, Earth's rotation, even the curvature of the planet. Get the math right, and distance becomes irrelevant." Mitchell watched as she made another series of calculations. "You're not just planning to disrupt their operation. You're going to dismantle it completely. One shot at a time," Sarah confirmed, but her voice held no satisfaction, only the focused determination of someone preparing to execute a carefully calculated plan. "They've created what they think is an impenetrable defense. Multiple security layers, advanced technology, elite operators, but they're all focused on defending against what they know." She turned to her companions, her expression serious. "Tomorrow, they learn why competitive shooting at extreme range isn't just a sport. It's an art form that turns mathematics into precision, distance into advantage, and impossibility into inevitability." A distant rumble drew their attention skyward. A sleek helicopter emerged from the gathering dusk, its black form cutting through the air with predatory grace. Sarah tracked it through her spotting scope, noting details that most observers would miss. Russian Mi-171, heavily modified, she observed. Reduced infrared signature, advanced avionics. They're establishing air superiority, probably equipped with thermal imaging systems and signal intelligence gear. 3 more choppers incoming from different directions, Tommy reported, checking his tablet. They're creating a coordinated air screen around the valley. Sarah's expression remained calculating as she made new entries in her range book. More variables to consider. Rotor wash will affect wind patterns, change air density in their flight. Paths. Most shooters would see this as a complication. For us, She began plotting new calculations. It's just another element to factor into the equation. Her phone displayed an urgent update from Thompson. The satellite feed showed vehicles departing from 5 different airports across 3 states, all converging on Wind River Valley. The handler was mobilizing his entire network. Facial recognition confirms multiple high-level organized crime figures among the arrivals. Thompson's message read, "This isn't just about expanding territory. They're planning to establish a major operations hub." Mitchell studied the data with growing concern. They're turning the auction house into a command center, not just for local operations, but for their entire regional network. "Because they think they've found the perfect location," Sarah explained, bringing up topographical maps on her laptop. "Remote enough to avoid attention, but with established transportation routes through the national forest. Local law enforcement compromised, community resistance minimal." She gestured to the surrounding mountains. "And terrain that most people would consider a natural barrier to any serious opposition." Tommy spread out new intelligence gathered from the auction house. They've installed a comprehensive security grid, motion sensors, infrared cameras, even acoustic detection systems designed to triangulate any gunshot within a 5-mile radius. "Standard counter-sniper technology," Sarah noted, making additional calculations. "But they're calibrated for typical engagement ranges. At extreme distances, the acoustic signature of a shot changes completely. The bullet arrives before the sound of the shot. It creates a totally different pattern than their systems are designed to detect." She opened another specialized case, revealing what appeared to be ordinary brass casings. "These aren't just shell casings, they're precision-engineered acoustic suppressors. In competition, we use them to reduce muzzle blast, minimize the effects of recoil. Out here," she held one up to the fading light, "they'll make their shot detection systems useless beyond a certain range." Her phone chimed with another encrypted message. Thompson had accessed the security contractor's technical specifications. The defensive measures being implemented around the auction house represented the cutting edge of VIP protection. "Look at this," Sarah indicated, showing them the technical readouts. "They're deploying a mobile counter-sniper suite that costs more than most people's homes. Advanced ballistic computers, atmospheric sensors, even predictive AI designed to calculate probable shooting positions." Her smile held a predator's satisfaction. "But all of it is based on military doctrine, on standard tactical assumptions." Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "And those assumptions don't apply to competitive shooting?" "Not at these ranges," Sarah confirmed, entering new data into her ballistic calculator. "Military sniping is about probability, putting rounds on target under combat conditions, competitive shooting at extreme range. That's about eliminating variables, about turning chaos into mathematical certainty." She gestured to her range book, its pages filled with years of meticulous data. "Every shot I've taken from these positions, under every possible weather condition, is documented here. Wind patterns, temperature variations, atmospheric pressure changes. It's not just data, it's a blueprint for making the impossible routine." Tommy's tablet displayed new security footage from inside the auction house. Teams of contractors were installing additional protective measures. Bulletproof panels, electronic countermeasures, even portable shield systems. "They're preparing for every possible threat," he observed. "Multiple redundant security layers, overlapping fields of fire, constant surveillance. And every single measure designed to counter threats they understand," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of their craft. "Look at their defensive positions, their patrol patterns. Everything is based on the assumption that no one can effectively engage targets beyond certain distances." She brought up historical weather data, comparing it with current conditions. "Tomorrow's forecast is perfect for extreme range shooting. High-pressure system, stable air mass, minimal wind variance at altitude. Conditions that most tactical operators wouldn't even consider relevant. Mitchell watched as she made another series of precise calculations. You're not just planning to disrupt their operation, he realized. You're going to use their own security measures against them. Sarah nodded, her expression focused. Every defensive position they establish, every patrol route they implement, they're not just showing us their playbook, they're limiting their own options. They think they're creating an impenetrable fortress. Instead, they're building a cage that will trap them in predictable patterns. Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The auction house was now surrounded by concentric rings of security, each layer adding another supposed level of protection. Remember the National Long-Range Championships 3 years ago? Sarah asked, making final adjustments to her equipment. That shot they said was impossible. Crosswind at 15 miles per hour, temperature gradient causing extreme mirage, target at 2,300 yards. Tommy's eyes widened. You won with a perfect score. Because I understood something fundamental about extreme range shooting, Sarah explained. At these distances, it's not about natural talent or even exceptional skill. It's about turning variables into constants, about understanding that every factor affecting the bullet's path can be measured, calculated, and compensated for. She began packing their observation equipment with practiced efficiency. Tomorrow, the handler and his entire organization will learn a crucial lesson about the difference between tactical doctrine and pure precision. They're bringing in the best security money can buy, the latest technology, proven defensive protocols, but they're all designed to counter known threats, to defend against standard tactical approaches. Mitchell helped secure their gear as Sarah continued. In competition, we regularly make shots that military trainers consider theoretically impossible. Not because we're better shooters, but because we approach it differently. Every variable is measured, every condition analyzed, every possible factor calculated into the equation. Her phone displayed one final update from Thompson. The handler's private jet had filed a flight plan for early morning arrival. They think they're preparing for a tactical engagement, Sarah said, her voice carrying absolute certainty. Instead, they're about to witness a demonstration of why competitive shooting at extreme range isn't just about hitting targets. It's about turning physics into poetry, mathematics into art, and impossibility into inevitable precision. First light painted Wind River Valley in shades of gold as a private Gulfstream jet touched down at the small regional airport. Sarah watched through her spotting scope as a convoy of armored vehicles met the aircraft, their formation speaking of extensive protective training. The handler had arrived, and with him came a level of security that transformed the quiet Wyoming morning into a tactical operation zone. 4 layers of protective detail, Mitchell observed from their concealed position. Inner circle, outer. Security, advanced teams and floating quick reaction force. Professional operators, not just hired muscle. They've got the airport locked down, Tommy added, monitoring radio frequencies with specialized equipment. Private security contractors at every access point, air support, maintaining constant coverage. Sarah maintained her focus on the central vehicle, a heavily modified SUV with subtle armor upgrades that would stop anything short of specialized anti-material rounds. Through her scope, she caught a glimpse of the handler, a slim man in an expensive suit, his movements carrying the confident precision of someone accustomed to absolute control. Motorcade moving, Tommy reported, taking the mountain route to avoid population centers. They've got jammers active, disrupting all standard communications within half a mile of the convoy. Standard operating procedure for high-value target. Protection, Sarah noted, already packing their observation gear. They'll take the long way, using terrain to their advantage, maintaining maximum tactical flexibility. Her phone displayed satellite imagery from Thompson, showing the convoys progress through the winding mountain roads. The handlers' security teams had established complete control of their route, with advance units securing potential ambush positions and aerial assets maintaining overwatch. "They're good," Mitchell admitted, watching the professional precision of the security operation. Every angle covered, every approach monitored. No one gets within a mile of that convoy without them knowing. Sarah's smile held no warmth as she shouldered her rifle case. "Fortunately, we don't need to get within a mile." She checked her watch. Time to move to position Alpha. The real game begins at the auction house. The mountain dawn had given way to clear morning skies as Sarah established her primary firing position on a remote ridge overlooking the auction house complex. The location, carefully chosen and prepared over years of planning, offered commanding views of the entire facility, while remaining outside the effective range of standard counter-sniper operations. "Auction starts in 6 hours, Tommy reported through their secured radio link. "Guest list shows every major rancher in 3 counties. Perfect cover for whatever they're really moving through the facility." Sarah made precise notations in her range book, documenting atmospheric conditions that would affect extreme range shooting. The morning air was cool and stable, ideal for the kind of precision work she had planned. Handler's convoy approaching the outer perimeter. Mitchell's voice crackled through the radio. "Security teams are expanding their coverage area, establishing multiple defensive layers." Through her spotting scope, Sarah watched the transformation of the auction house grounds. Professional operators moved with practiced efficiency, establishing interlocking fields of fire and deploying sophisticated security equipment. "They're setting up mobile counter-sniper units," Tommy observed. "Latest generation equipment, thermal imaging, acoustic detection arrays, even atmospheric sensors for ballistic calculations." "All excellent tools," Sarah replied, making additional notes. "But they're calibrated for standard engagement distances. At extreme range, different physics apply." She studied the wind indicators she'd placed at various distances. "From this position, we're dealing with multiple wind zones, temperature variations between elevations, even light refraction through different air masses." Her phone displayed new intelligence from Thompson. The handlers' organization was moving significant resources into position, using the auction as cover for establishing a major operational hub. "Facial recognition confirms multiple cartel representatives arriving," Thompson's message read. "This isn't just about local control. They're planning to transform Wind River Valley into a transit point for international operations." Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's vehicle arrived at the auction house. His security detail moved with seamless coordination, establishing overlapping protective zones before he emerged. "Their procedures are perfect," Mitchell commented. "Every approach covered, every potential threat anticipated, traditional tactical doctrine executed flawlessly." "That's their weakness," Sarah replied, making final adjustments to her custom rifle. "They're preparing for threats they understand, for standard military and law enforcement responses. No one considers the possibility of precision shooting. At distances their doctrine says are impossible." Tommy's voice carried tension as he reported from his position. "They're moving something through the back loading areas. Heavy security, specialized transport vehicles. Whatever their real cargo is, it's significant." Sarah's mind calculated trajectories, factoring in every variable that would affect a shot at extreme range. The morning sun had warmed the valley unevenly, creating distinct temperature zones that would influence bullet path. Wind currents moved between the ridges in predictable patterns, their effect magnified by distance. "Remember the Rocky Mountain Invitational?" she asked, her voice carrying the calm focus that had won her multiple championships. "That shot everyone said couldn't be made. Crosswind at 20 miles per hour, extreme temperature gradient, target barely visible through mirage. You took gold, Mitchell recalled. Perfect score at a distance that had the judges checking. Their equipment. Because competitive shooting isn't about what's theoretically possible, Sarah explained, documenting another set of atmospheric readings. It's about understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes mathematical. Wind, speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, they're not obstacles, they're just variables in an equation. Her phone displayed thermal images from Thompson's surveillance. The auction house was now surrounded by concentric rings of security, each layer adding supposed protection while actually making movement patterns more predictable. They're establishing their defensive positions exactly where we anticipated, Sarah noted, marking key locations in her range book. Every security measure, every patrol route, they're not just showing us their playbook, they're locking themselves into patterns we can exploit. Mitchell watched through binoculars as more vehicles arrived, bringing additional security personnel and sophisticated equipment. They're creating an impenetrable defense. No, Sarah corrected, her voice carrying absolute certainty. They're building a precisely calibrated shooting gallery. Every position they fortify, every route they establish. They're defining exactly where their people will be at any given moment. Tommy's radio crackled with urgency. Handlers starting his inspection, moving through the facility with full security detail. Their counter-sniper teams are at maximum alert. Sarah made final adjustments to her scope, checking and rechecking. The precisely calculated data in her range book. Each notation represented hours of preparation, years of competition experience applied to a single purpose. You know what separates champions from merely excellent shooters? She asked, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades mastering their craft. It's not natural talent or even exceptional skill. It's the understanding that at extreme range, precision isn't about what you can do. It's about what you can prove mathematically impossible to miss. Her phone displayed one final update from Thompson. The handlers' organization had activated their full security protocol, transforming the auction house into what they believed was an impregnable fortress. They think they're preparing for a tactical engagement, Sarah said, her rifle now resting perfectly aligned with the precisely calculated firing solution. Instead, they're about to witness a demonstration of why competitive shooting at extreme range isn't just about hitting targets. It's about turning physics into art, distance into advantage, and mathematical certainty into inevitable victory. A slight shift in the wind caught her attention. Sarah consulted the specialized meteorological equipment she'd positioned across the valley over the past months. The data confirmed what her instincts had already detected, a subtle change. In atmospheric conditions that would affect long-range ballistics, new pattern emerging, she reported, making quick calculations in her range book. High-altitude wind shift creating vertical temperature stratification. Most shooters would consider these conditions problematic. And you? Mitchell asked, noting her focused expression. I see predictable variables. She adjusted her position slightly, realigning her firing solution. In competition, we learn that changing conditions aren't obstacles, they're opportunities. Each atmospheric layer becomes a known quantity, each wind current a calculated factor. Tommy's voice came through their secure channel. Handler's security team is implementing something new. They're deploying mobile RF sensors, creating a detection grid around the facility. Sarah studied the new equipment through her scope. Advanced technology, designed to detect electronic signatures from communication devices, trigger mechanisms, even scope batteries. Her smile held professional appreciation. Excellent countermeasures for standard tactical operations. But not for what we're doing? Mitchell inquired. My equipment is completely passive, Sarah explained, indicating her specialized gear. No electronic signatures, no radio emissions. In competition, We learn to read conditions naturally, mirage patterns, wind indicators, atmospheric effects. Technology is useful, but over-reliance on it creates vulnerabilities. Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The auction house security teams had established overlapping patrol patterns, creating what they believed was complete coverage of every approach. "Look at their rotation schedule," Sarah indicated, marking timestamps in her range book. "They're using standard military doctrine, changing guards every 2 hours, rotating positions to maintain alertness. Perfect procedure for close protection operations." "But at extreme range," Tommy asked. "At these distances, their patrol patterns become mathematics. Every position change, every rotation. They're creating a precise timeline of exactly where their personnel will be." She made another series of calculations. "In competition, we learn to read time the same way we read distance. Every second affects ballistic solutions. Every minute changes atmospheric conditions." Mitchell observed the facility through his binoculars. "They're bringing in more equipment, some kind of specialized sensor array." Sarah recognized the technology immediately. "Laser detection systems. They're designed to identify optical signatures. From scopes, rangefinders, any observation equipment." She gestured to her custom optics. "But these were built for competition shooting. Special coatings eliminate reflection, curved glass prevents detection. When you're competing at international levels, every advantage matters." Her phone chimed with another update from Thompson. The satellite imagery showed increased activity in the auction house's restricted areas, specialized transport vehicles being prepared, secure storage units being readied. "Whatever they're moving through here, it's significant," Tommy reported. "Security protocols I've never seen before, even in military operations." "Because this isn't just about expanding territory," Sarah replied, monitoring the handler's movements through her scope. "They're establishing a major hub, using Wind River Valley's isolation and compromised local government to create a secure transit point." She opened another case, revealing specialized ammunition that gleamed in the morning light. These rounds were developed for the World Long Range Championships, each one hand-loaded to exact specifications, tested under varying conditions. In competition, this level of precision makes the difference between gold and silver. "And out here?" Mitchell asked. "Out here, it's the difference between making a statement and making history." She began documenting new atmospheric readings. "The handler thinks he's created an impenetrable defense. Multiple security layers, advanced technology, elite operators, all focused on preventing anyone from getting close enough to threaten his operation." Tommy's voice carried tension as he reported new developments. "They're establishing additional sniper positions, high-end rifles, thermal optics, even computerized firing solutions." "Standard counter-sniper protocol," Sarah noted, making additional calculations. "They'll set up overlapping fields of fire, establish mutual support positions, everything by the book." She checked her range book again. "But their book doesn't account for what we're about to do." Her phone displayed new intelligence from Thompson. The handlers' organization had activated their full electronic warfare suite, creating a dome of electronic countermeasures around the facility. Signal jammers, drone detection systems, even acoustic sensors designed to triangulate any gunshot. "Within their operational radius," Mitchell observed. "They're not leaving anything to chance." Sarah's expression remained focused as she made final adjustments to her firing position. "You know what I learned in my last competition before retiring? It wasn't about shooting technique or even precision. It was about understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes interconnected. Wind affects temperature, temperature affects air density affects bullet path. It's all one unified equation." She indicated her range book, its pages filled with years of meticulous data. Every shot I've taken from this position, under every possible condition, is documented here. Not just the results, but the process. The way morning air moves differently than afternoon. How cloud cover affects ground temperature. How terrain features influence wind patterns. Tommy's radio crackled with new information. Auctions are starting to draw crowds. Local ranchers arriving, providing perfect cover for whatever they're really doing. "And giving us exactly what we need," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the same steady calm that had won her multiple championships. "They think the crowd provides security, making any direct action impossible. Instead, they're establishing fixed patterns, predictable movements." Mitchell watched as more security teams deployed around the facility. "They're creating what they think is perfect protection." "No," Sarah corrected, her rifle aligned with mathematical precision. "They're demonstrating the fundamental difference between tactical doctrine and competitive excellence. They're preparing for every threat they can imagine, while we're preparing to show them something beyond their imagination." The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Wind River Valley as the auction house parking lot filled with vehicles. Local ranchers arrived in dusty trucks, mixing with sleek SUVs carrying the handlers' associates. Through her spotting scope, Sarah watched the carefully choreographed dance of security teams managing the growing crowd while maintaining their protective cordon. "Guest list shows 37 local ranchers confirmed," Tommy reported through their secure channel. "Plus at least 15 high-level organized crime figures disguised as legitimate buyers. They're using the crowd to mask their real meeting." Facial recognition confirms cartel representatives from 3 countries, Thompson's message added. "This isn't just a show of force. They're establishing distribution networks, creating new smuggling routes." Sarah made precise adjustments to her shooting position, each movement calculated to maintain perfect alignment with her pre-planned firing solutions. The mountain breeze carried the scent of sage and pine, its patterns telling stories about air density and temperature variations that would affect long-range ballistics. "Security teams are implementing their final measures," Mitchell observed, from his concealed position. "Mobile jamming units, counter-surveillance drones, even ground-based radar systems." Through her scope, Sarah studied the placement of their defensive equipment. They're establishing what they think is complete coverage. But look at their sensor placement, all calibrated for standard tactical ranges. They don't realize that at extreme distances, their equipment becomes virtually useless. Her range book lay open beside her, its pages documenting years of shots taken under varying conditions. But today's notations were different, not just weather data and ballistic calculations, but precise timing of security patrol patterns, guard rotations, and vehicle movements. "Handlers starting his private meetings," Tommy reported, "using the auction as cover while they coordinate with their international partners. Main cargo is being prepared for transport during the show." Sarah's mind calculated trajectories as she observed the facility through her specialized optics. The afternoon heat had created distinct temperature layers in the air, each one affecting bullet path in ways that most shooters wouldn't even consider. "Remember the International Precision Rifle Series?" she asked quietly. "That shot in Colorado that everyone said was technically impossible? 15-mile-per-hour wind, extreme temperature gradient, target barely visible through mirage. You didn't just make the shot," Mitchell recalled. "You set a new world record." "Because I understood something fundamental about extreme range shooting," Sarah explained, making new notations. "At these distances, success isn't about skill or even experience. It's about turning chaos into mathematics, understanding that every variable, no matter how small, is part of a larger equation." Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The handlers' security teams had established multiple sniper positions around the facility, their high-end rifles equipped with computerized ballistic calculators. "They're preparing for a conventional threat," Sarah noted, studying their positions. Multiple shooters, coordinated attacks, standard military doctrine. They've got every obvious angle covered, every traditional approach secured. Tommy's voice carried tension as he monitored the security channels. They're running final checks on their counter-sniper systems, acoustic sensors, thermal imaging, even seismic detectors for movement in the surrounding area. All excellent equipment, Sarah acknowledged, making another series of calculations. But they're defending against what they understand. Watch their patrol patterns, see how they maintain line-of-sight coverage between positions, perfect for urban operations, for normal engagement distances. Mitchell observed the facility through his binoculars. They're not leaving anything to chance. Every approach is monitored, every potential firing position covered. Except they're thinking like tactical operators, Sarah replied, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of their craft. They're looking for military-style threats, for standard sniper tactics. They don't understand that competitive shooting at extreme range operates under completely different principles. Her range book told the story, not just of today's operation, but of years spent preparing for this moment. Each page documented shots taken under specific conditions, creating a mathematical blueprint for achieving what most people considered impossible. Auction starting, Tommy reported. Main arena filling up with local ranchers. Security teams maintain full coverage of all access points. Sarah watched through her scope as the handler moved through the facility, surrounded by layers of professional protection. His security detail maintained perfect positioning, their movement speaking of extensive training and experience. Look at their formation, she indicated. Textbook close protection procedures, multiple layers of security, overlapping fields of fire, constant situational awareness. They're executing standard protocols flawlessly. Her phone chimed with another update from Thompson. The satellite imagery showed increased activity in the auction house's restricted areas, specialized transport vehicles being readied, secure storage units being prepared for movement. Whatever they're moving through here, it's significant, Mitchell observed. Multiple transport routes coordinated, backup plans for every contingency. Because they think they've created perfect security, Sarah replied, making final adjustments to her firing position. Multiple defensive layers, advanced technology, elite operators, all focused on preventing anyone from getting close enough to threaten their operation. She opened another case, revealing specialized ammunition that gleamed in the late afternoon light. These rounds were developed for the World Extreme Range Championships, each one hand-loaded to exact specifications, tested under varying conditions. The bullets themselves are machined to tolerances finer than a human hair. Tommy's radio crackled with new information. Handler's security teams are implementing their final defensive measures. Electronic warfare suite fully activated, counter-surveillance systems at maximum sensitivity. They're creating what they think is an impenetrable defense, Sarah noted, her rifle aligned with mathematical precision. But they're making a fundamental mistake. They're preparing for a tactical engagement, for traditional military threats. Mitchell watched as more security teams deployed around the facility. And what are they actually facing? Sarah's smile held no warmth as she made her final calculations. They're about to learn the difference between tactical doctrine and competitive excellence, between what's tactically possible and what's mathematically certain. Her range book lay open to today's data. Wind speeds, temperature gradients, atmospheric pressure readings. But these weren't just numbers. They were variables in an equation that would transform this quiet valley into a precision shooting gallery. You know what separates champions from merely excellent shooters? She asked, her voice carrying the same steady calm that had won her multiple titles. It's not talent or even skill. It's the understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes interconnected. Every variable affects every other variable, creating a complex web of cause and effect. Through her scope, Sarah watched the handler's organization operating with what they believed was perfect security. Every movement was coordinated, every position covered, every approach monitored. They had created what they thought was an impregnable fortress. But they don't understand what they're really facing, she said quietly, her rifle becoming an extension of her mathematical calculations. They think they're protected by distance, by technology, by tactical doctrine. They're about to learn that in the world of competitive shooting at extreme range, those aren't obstacles, they're opportunities. A slight change in the air pressure caught her attention. Sarah consulted her barometer, noting a subtle shift that would affect long-range ballistics. Most shooters wouldn't even notice such a minor variation, but at extreme distances, every atmospheric change became crucial. Pressure dropping 2 millibars, she noted, making quick calculations, creating a density-altitude shift that'll affect bullet trajectory by approximately 3 inches at maximum range. That small change matters, Mitchell asked, watching. Her precise adjustments. At these distances, everything matters, she indicated her ballistic calculator. A 2 millibar pressure change means slightly thinner air. Thinner air means less drag on the bullet, which increases velocity by about 5 feet per second. At 2,000 yards, that translates to a different point of impact. Tommy's voice came through their secure channel with new intelligence. They're moving something significant through the lower levels. Heavy security, specialized handling equipment, whatever it is, they're treating it like nuclear material. Sarah studied the movement patterns through her scope. Their security procedures are revealing more than they realize. Look at the formation. They're maintaining triple coverage on that cargo, but it's creating predictable gaps in their wider defense. Her phone displayed updated thermal imaging from Thompson. The handlers' organization had implemented their full security protocol, transforming the auction house into what they believed was an impregnable fortress. New counter-sniper teams taking position on the roof, Mitchell reported. High-end equipment, military-grade optics. They're establishing overlapping fields of fire. Standard doctrine, Sarah noted, making additional calculations. They're preparing for traditional sniper threats, multiple shooters, coordinated attacks, conventional distances, but look at their positioning. She opened her range book to a section filled with complex mathematical formulas. In competition, we learn to read terrain differently. Those roof positions, they're perfect for monitoring the surrounding area, but they create distinct wind. In patterns, the building's heat signature affects air density, creates predictable thermal currents. Tommy's surveillance picked up new radio traffic. Handlers implementing additional security measures. They're deploying some kind of advanced detection system. Sarah recognized the equipment being installed. Quantum radar detection, latest generation technology, designed to identify any potential threat within its operational radius. She smiled coldly. Excellent system for standard tactical ranges. At extreme distances, quantum coherence breaks down. The technology becomes virtually useless. Her phone chimed with another update from Thompson. Satellite imagery showed the handlers' organization establishing multiple escape routes, each one carefully planned and secured. They're thinking tactically, Sarah observed, marking patrol patterns in her range book. Multiple extraction options, secured rally points, even air support on standby. Perfect procedure for close protection operations. Mitchell watched through his binoculars as more security teams deployed around the facility. They're not leaving anything to chance. That's their mistake, Sarah replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. They're so focused on eliminating variables that they're creating patterns. Every security measure, every patrol route, every defensive position. They're turning the entire facility into a mathematical model. She brought up specialized weather data on her laptop. Look at these temperature readings. The afternoon heat has created distinct thermal layers in the air. Most shooters see that as a problem. It creates mirage, affects visibility, makes range estimation difficult. But for you, Tommy asked, for a competitive shooter, those thermal layers are navigation aids. Each one affects the bullet path in a predictable way. Combined with wind data, atmospheric pressure readings, and precise ranging, they become part of our flight path calculation. Her range book contained detailed diagrams of the facility's defensive positions. But unlike military tactical planning, these notes focused on mathematical relationships, angles, distances, atmospheric effects that would influence extreme range shooting. "You know what I learned in my last championship?" Sarah asked, making another series of precise adjustments. The difference between good shooters and champions isn't about skill or even experience. It's about understanding that at extreme range, everything is interconnected. Wind affects temperature, temperature affects air density affects bullet path. It's all one unified equation. Tommy's radio picked up increased activity. Auctions are in full swing now. Main arena packed with local ranchers while they move their real cargo through the back. "Perfect," Sarah replied, her rifle becoming an extension of pure mathematics. They think the crowd provides security, making any action impossible. Instead, they're establishing fixed patterns, predictable movements. Every person in that building becomes a reference point, every security team a marker in our ballistic equation. Her phone displayed new thermal images from Thompson. The handler's security teams had activated their full electronic warfare suite, creating what they believed was an impenetrable defensive screen. Signal jammers, drone detection systems, even acoustic sensors designed to triangulate any gunshot within their operational radius, Mitchell observed. They're creating multiple layers of technological protection, while missing the fundamental principle of extreme range shooting, Sarah noted, making final adjustments to her scope. At these distances, technology becomes secondary to pure physics. Everything they're deploying is designed for standard tactical engagements for normal operating parameters. She indicated her custom rifle, built to specifications that had helped her set 3 world records. This isn't about tactical superiority or even superior equipment. It's about understanding that at extreme range, precision shooting becomes pure mathematics. Every variable can be measured, every effect calculated, every outcome predicted with absolute certainty. The sun dipped toward the western peaks as Sarah Anderson initiated the first phase of her operation. Through her spotting scope, she watched the handler's security teams execute their protection protocols with flawless precision, unaware that their very professionalism made them predictable targets. Primary cargo moving through the lower levels, Tommy reported through their secure channel. 4 specialized transport vehicles, each with its own security detail. They're using the auction crowd as cover for the real operation. Sarah's finger touched her range book, confirming calculations she'd prepared for exactly this scenario. The afternoon light caught something metallic at the facility's edge, a security team adjusting their counter-sniper equipment with what they believed was perfect positioning. New defensive measures being implemented, Mitchell observed from his concealed position. They're deploying some kind of advanced sensor array. DARPA's latest prototype, Sarah noted, studying the equipment through her scope. Quantum-based detection system designed to identify potential threats through atmospheric disturbance patterns. Her smile held professional appreciation. Cutting-edge technology meant to make long-range shooting impossible. Thompson's satellite feed showed the handler's organization executing their plan with military precision. Each movement was coordinated, each position secured, creating what they believed was an impenetrable defense. Time to demonstrate the difference between tactical theory and competitive reality, Sarah said quietly, making final adjustments to her firing solution. The mountain breeze carried complex stories about air density and temperature variations, crucial data for what she was about to attempt. "Handlers moving to the secure conference room," Tommy reported. "Full security detail, multiple layers of protection. They're implementing a complete electronic lockdown of the facility." Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's protective detail maintained perfect formation around him. Their movement spoke of extensive training, of countless operations executed flawlessly. But at these distances, their tactical excellence became mathematical predictability. "You know what most people don't understand about extreme range shooting?" she asked, her voice carrying the same steady calm that had won her championships. "It's not about what's possible or impossible. It's about turning variables into constants, chaos into equations." Her finger moved to the trigger, but this wasn't just about shooting. Each movement was precisely calculated, every muscle tension controlled to eliminate any deviation from the perfect firing solution. The afternoon sun had created distinct temperature layers in the air, each one affecting bullet path in ways that most shooters wouldn't even consider. "First phase initiating," she announced quietly. "Time to remind them why competitive shooting operates beyond tactical limitations." The shot, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. No dramatic muzzle flash, no thunderous report, just the whisper of custom-tuned ammunition, leaving a precision-crafted barrel. At these distances, the bullet would travel for several seconds, affected by dozens of atmospheric variables that Sarah had calculated into her firing solution. 3 seconds later, the handler's lead security vehicle erupted in a precisely calculated mechanical failure. No explosion, no obvious damage, just a perfect shot that disabled the engine block exactly as planned. "Primary transport disabled," Mitchell confirmed, watching through his binoculars. "They're implementing emergency procedures, establishing defensive positions around the handler." Sarah was already adjusting her firing solution, accounting for the subtle atmospheric changes that occurred as the sun continued its descent. The security team's response was tactically perfect, creating overlapping fields of fire, securing potential threat vectors, implementing standard protection protocols. "They're scanning for threats," Tommy reported, monitoring their communications. "Counter-sniper teams deploying to pre-designated positions, electronic warfare suite at maximum output." "All excellent procedures," Sarah noted, making new calculations in her range book, "but they're looking for threats they understand, preparing for standard tactical responses." Her next shot whispered across the valley, traveling for long seconds before disabling the backup vehicle's transmission with surgical precision. "Secondary transport neutralized," Mitchell confirmed. "They're shifting to contingency plans, preparing civilian vehicles for emergency extraction." Through her scope, Sarah watched the handler's security teams execute their emergency protocols. Each movement was professional, each response based on proven tactical doctrine. But they were operating under a crucial misconception, believing that distance provided safety, that their defensive technology made them untouchable. "Handlers moving to fallback position Alpha," Tommy reported. "Implementing total electronic lockdown. They're activating some kind of advanced countermeasure system." Sarah recognized the equipment being deployed. Next-generation anti-sniper technology designed to make precision shooting impossible at any significant range. The security teams moved with practiced efficiency, establishing what they believed was an impenetrable defensive screen. "Look at their tactical response," she indicated, making new notations in her range book. "Perfect by military standards, multiple layers of security, overlapping fields of fire, complete technological coverage. They're executing standard doctrine flawlessly." Her phone displayed updated thermal imaging from Thompson. "The handlers, Organization had activated their full defensive protocol, transforming the auction house into a technological fortress. "Third phase ready," Sarah announced, her voice carrying absolute certainty. The afternoon sun had painted the valley in shades of gold, creating distinct temperature gradients that most shooters would consider problematic. But for someone who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of competitive shooting, these conditions were simply variables in an equation. "You know what separates champions from tactical operators?" she asked, making minute adjustments to her firing position. "It's not skill or even experience. It's the understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes pure mathematics. Every atmospheric condition, every temperature variation, every wind current, they're all just parts of a unified calculation." Her next shot demonstrated this principle with devastating clarity. The bullet traveled for nearly 4 seconds, affected by multiple wind zones and temperature layers, before striking the handler's emergency communications array with surgical precision. No collateral damage, no risk to civilians, just a perfectly calculated shot that eliminated their ability to coordinate with outside support. "Primary communications disabled," Mitchell confirmed. "They're shifting to backup systems, implementing isolation protocols." Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's security teams responded with professional precision. Their movements were tactically perfect, their defensive positions flawlessly executed, but they were still operating under traditional doctrine, still believing in limitations that didn't apply to competitive shooting at extreme range. "Final phase initiating," she announced quietly. The sun's angle had changed slightly, affecting temperature gradients and air density in ways that she had calculated into her firing solution. Her range book contained precise data for these conditions, not just measurements, but a mathematical model of how each variable would influence bullet path at extreme distance. Tommy's voice carried tension as he reported from his position. Handlers implementing total lockdown, security teams establishing final defensive positions. They're bringing in some kind of specialized equipment. DARPA's prototype anti-sniper system, Sarah noted, studying the technology through her scope. Designed to make precision shooting impossible by creating atmospheric disturbance patterns that disrupt bullet trajectory. She made a final series of calculations. "Excellent theory for standard tactical ranges." Her shot whispered across the valley, traveling through multiple atmospheric layers before striking the prototype system's primary sensor array. The precision-engineered round didn't destroy the equipment. It simply disabled specific components, with surgical accuracy, transforming their advanced technology into expensive decoration. "Target neutralized," Mitchell confirmed. "Their entire defensive screen is compromised. Handlers' security teams implementing emergency extraction protocols." Sarah watched through her scope as the handlers' organization began to realize the true nature of their situation. All their tactical excellence, all their advanced technology, all their proven doctrine, none of it prepared them for someone who treated extreme-range shooting as an exact science. "You know what I learned in my last championship?" she asked, already calculating her next firing solution. "The difference between good shooters and champions isn't about skill or even technology. It's about understanding that at extreme range, precision becomes pure mathematics. Every variable can be measured, every effect calculated, every outcome determined with absolute certainty." Chaos erupted across the auction house grounds as the handlers' security teams scrambled to counter a threat that defied their tactical doctrine. Sarah watched through her scope as their perfectly orchestrated defense began to unravel, each precisely calculated shot dismantling another layer of their supposed protection. "Emergency protocols in full effect," Tommy reported, monitoring their communications. They're attempting to coordinate with external assets, but their primary channels are compromised. Backup systems showing significant electromagnetic interference. That interference isn't technical, Sarah noted, making new calculations in her range book. The afternoon heat rising from the valley floor is creating atmospheric distortion. At these distances, it affects radio waves the same way it affects bullet trajectory. Thompson's satellite feed showed the handler's organization implementing their contingency plans. Multiple vehicles were being prepared, each one following different escape routes designed to make pursuit impossible. Secondary transport teams moving into position, Mitchell observed from his concealed location. They're establishing rotating, defensive screens, trying to prevent pattern recognition. Sarah studied their movements through her specialized optics. The security team's response was professionally executed, but their very expertise made them predictable. Each defensive maneuver, each tactical repositioning, created mathematical certainty in her firing solutions. Handlers moving to secure. Location Bravo, Tommy reported. Full protective detail, implementing some kind of advanced countermeasure system. Electromagnetic pulse generators, Sarah identified, watching the equipment being deployed, designed to disrupt any electronic targeting systems within their effective radius. Her smile held professional appreciation. Excellent technology for defeating modern military threats. She adjusted her position slightly, compensating for the subtle shift in wind patterns that occurred as the sun's angle changed. Her custom rifle, built to specifications that had helped her set multiple world records, required no electronic assistance. You know what most tactical operators don't understand about competitive shooting? She asked, making precise notations. Technology is useful, but at extreme range, it's the shooter's understanding of natural phenomena that determines success. Her next shot demonstrated this principle with devastating efficiency. The bullet traveled for nearly 4 seconds, passing through multiple atmospheric layers before striking the handler's backup communications array. The precision-engineered round didn't destroy the equipment. It simply severed specific connections with surgical accuracy. Primary and secondary communications neutralized, Mitchell confirmed. They're shifting to isolated tactical channels, implementing autonomous cell protocols. Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's security teams executed their emergency procedures. Their movements spoke of extensive training, of countless operations conducted flawlessly. But they were still operating under traditional limitations, still believing in boundaries that didn't apply to competitive shooting at extreme range. Handlers implementing total lockdown, Tommy reported. Security teams establishing final defensive positions. Wait, something's changed. They're bringing in specialized equipment I've never seen before. Quantum detection grid, Sarah noted, studying the technology through her scope. Latest generation prototype, designed to identify potential threats by analyzing atmospheric disturbance patterns. She made new calculations. Impressive system, but like all their technology, it's calibrated for standard tactical ranges. Thompson's satellite imagery showed increased activity around the auction house. The handler's organization was mobilizing every resource, implementing every security measure at their disposal. Look at their response pattern, Sarah indicated, marking positions in her range book. They're establishing overlapping fields of fire, creating multiple defensive layers, perfect tactical doctrine for conventional threats. Her next shot whispered across the valley, traveling through distinct temperature gradients before striking the quantum detection system's primary sensor. The precision-crafted round didn't need to destroy the multi-million-dollar equipment. It simply disabled specific components with mathematical accuracy. Detection grid compromised, Mitchell confirmed. They're implementing emergency extraction protocols, preparing for immediate evacuation. Sarah watched through her optics as the handler's security teams began to realize the true nature of their situation. All their tactical excellence, all their advanced technology, all their proven doctrine, none of it prepared them for someone who treated extreme-range shooting as an exact science. "Final phase initiating," she announced quietly. The sun's angle had shifted again, affecting temperature gradients and air density in ways that she had calculated into her firing solution. Her range book contained precise data for these conditions, not just measurements, but a mathematical model of how each variable would influence bullet path at extreme distance. Tommy's voice carried tension as he reported new developments. "Handler's security detail is changing tactics. They're abandoning standard protocols, implementing some kind of specialized counter-sniper operation." "They're finally starting to understand," Sarah noted, studying their movements, "but they're still thinking tactically, still operating under traditional constraints." She made final adjustments to her firing position. "They don't realize that, at these distances, conventional tactical doctrine becomes meaningless." Her shot demonstrated this truth with clinical precision. The bullet traveled for several seconds, affected by multiple atmospheric variables that Sarah had calculated into her firing solution, before striking the handler's last secure vehicle with surgical accuracy. The round didn't cause catastrophic damage. It simply disabled specific mechanical components, transforming their armored transport into expensive decoration. "Target neutralized," Mitchell confirmed. All escape routes were compromised. Handlers, organization implementing final contingency plans. Through her scope, Sarah watched the transformation in their tactical response. The security team's movements had lost their confident precision, replaced by the uncertainty of professionals confronting something beyond their experience. "You know what separates champions from tactical experts?" she asked, already calculating her next firing solution. "It's not skill or even technology. It's the understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes pure mathematics. Every variable can be measured, every effect calculated, every outcome determined with absolute certainty." Her phone displayed updated thermal imaging from Thompson. The handler's organization had activated their final defensive protocols, transforming the auction house into what they believed was an impregnable fortress. "Counter-sniper teams repositioning," Tommy reported. "They're attempting to establish some kind of mobile defense pattern." "Standard tactical response," Sarah noted, making new calculations. "They're trying to create unpredictable movement. In patterns, prevent targeting solutions." She studied their formations through her scope, but at these distances, their very professionalism makes them mathematically predictable. Mitchell watched through his binoculars as more security teams deployed around the facility. "They're not leaving anything to chance." "That's their mistake," Sarah replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. "They're so focused on eliminating variables that they're creating patterns. Every security measure, every patrol route, every defensive position. They're turning the entire facility into a precisely calculated shooting gallery." Her next shot demonstrated this principle with devastating clarity. The bullet traveled through multiple atmospheric layers, its path affected by dozens of variables that Sarah had computed into her firing solution, before striking the handler's last communications array with surgical precision. "All external communications were neutralized," Mitchell confirmed. "They're completely isolated." Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's organization began to comprehend the full implications of their situation. All their tactical expertise, all their advanced technology, all their proven doctrine, none of it prepared them for someone who had spent decades turning extreme-range shooting into a mathematical certainty. "New movement at the north entrance," Tommy reported urgently. "They're bringing in some kind of specialized equipment, looks military-grade, but nothing I've seen before." Through her scope, Sarah identified the system being deployed. Israeli-made XR-720 counter-sniper platform combines acoustic detection, thermal imaging, and atmospheric analysis. It costs more than most people's homes. She made new notations in her range book. Fascinating technology, but like everything else they're using, it's designed for conventional engagement distances. Her phone displayed fresh intelligence from Thompson. The satellite imagery showed the handler's security teams implementing a complex defensive pattern, their movements creating what they believed was unpredictable coverage. They're establishing randomized patrol routes, Mitchell observed, trying to prevent any fixed patterns that could be exploited. Except there's no such thing as truly random movement in tactical operations, Sarah replied, studying their formations. Professional operators always default to trained responses, to proven procedures. At these distances, that makes them mathematically predictable. The afternoon sun had created new temperature gradients across the valley, each layer affecting bullet trajectory in ways that Sarah had spent years learning to calculate. Her range book contained precise data for these conditions. Not just measurements, but a comprehensive model of how atmospheric variables interacted at extreme distances. Handler's security detail implementing new protocols, Tommy reported, monitoring their communications. They're shifting to some kind of autonomous cell structure, each team operating independently. Classic counter-sniper doctrine, Sarah noted, making new calculations. Break up predictable patterns, prevent single points of failure. Excellent tactical thinking, but they're still operating under traditional constraints. Her next shot demonstrated this truth with clinical precision. The bullet traveled for more than 3 seconds, its path affected by multiple atmospheric layers and wind currents, before striking the XR-720's primary sensor array with surgical accuracy. The precision-engineered round didn't need to destroy the multi-million-dollar system. It simply disabled specific components, transforming their advanced technology into expensive decoration. Counter-sniper platform neutralized, Mitchell confirmed. They're implementing emergency protocols, shifting to manual security operations. Through her specialized optics, Sarah watched the transformation in the handler's tactical response. The security team's movements had lost their practiced confidence, replaced by the uncertainty of professionals confronting something beyond their experience. Thermal imaging shows increased activity in the lower levels, Thompson's message reported. They're moving their primary cargo to hardened storage areas, implementing total lockdown procedures. Sarah studied the facility through her scope, noting how the security teams had positioned themselves to create overlapping fields of fire. Their formation was tactically perfect for defending against conventional threats at standard engagement distances. "You know what most security experts don't understand about competitive shooting?" she asked, making precise adjustments to a firing solution. At extreme range, conventional tactical doctrine becomes irrelevant. The variables that affect bullet trajectory at these distances, atmospheric refraction, Coriolis effect, even the curvature of the Earth, they're beyond normal military training. Her phone displayed new thermal data from Thompson. The handler's organization had activated additional countermeasures, transforming the auction house into what they believed was an impenetrable fortress. Counter-sniper teams repositioning, Tommy reported. They're implementing some kind of coordinated defense grid, trying to eliminate any potential firing solutions. Standard tactical response, Sarah noted, studying their movements. They're creating what they think is unpredictable. Coverage, preventing any fixed targeting solutions. She made new entries in her range book. But at these distances, their very professionalism makes them mathematically certain. Mitchell watched through his binoculars as more security teams deployed around the facility. They're not leaving anything to chance. That's their fundamental mistake, Sarah replied, her voice carrying absolute certainty. They're so focused on eliminating tactical variables that they're creating mathematical patterns. every security measure, every patrol route, every defensive position. They're transforming this entire operation into a precisely calculated equation. Her next shot demonstrated this principle with devastating clarity. The bullet traveled through multiple atmospheric layers, its path affected by dozens of variables that Sarah had computed into her firing solution before striking the handler's emergency power distribution system with surgical precision. Primary and backup power systems were compromised, Mitchell confirmed. They're shifting to emergency generators, implementing isolated cell protocols. Sarah watched through her scope as the handler's organization struggled to maintain control of their rapidly deteriorating situation. Their tactical responses were professionally executed, their security measures implemented with military precision. But they were still operating under a crucial misconception, believing that their advanced technology and proven doctrine made them invulnerable. Handlers implementing final contingency plans, Tommy reported, his voice tense with anticipation. They're preparing for complete evacuation, moving all essential personnel to hardened positions. Look at their movement patterns, Sarah indicated, making new calculations. They're following standard extraction protocols, establishing sequential fallback positions. She studied their formations through her specialized optics. Perfect and tactical doctrine for conventional threats at normal engagement distances. Her range book told the story of years spent preparing for this moment. Each page contained not just shooting data, but a comprehensive understanding of how atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectory at extreme range. This wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about turning physics into mathematics, probability into certainty. You know what separates competitive shooting from tactical operations? She asked, making final adjustments to her firing position. It's not about skill or even technology. It's about understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes interconnected. Every atmospheric variable, every temperature gradient, every wind current, they're all part of a unified mathematical equation. The setting sun painted Wind River Valley in shades of crimson as Sarah Anderson made her final calculations. Through her spotting scope, she watched the handler's organization crumble, their supposedly impregnable defense reduced to desperate tactical maneuvers. All escape routes compromised, Tommy reported through their secure channel. They're attempting to establish new extraction points, but every backup plan has been systematically eliminated. Sarah studied the facility through her specialized optics, noting how the fading light created new atmospheric conditions that most shooters would consider problematic. The changing temperature gradients, the shifting wind patterns. At these distances, every variable became crucial. Handlers implementing final defensive measures, Mitchell observed from his position. They're concentrating remaining security teams around his location, creating multiple protective layers. A last stand, Sarah noted, making precise adjustments to her firing solution. They're abandoning tactical doctrine, falling back on pure defensive mass. Her range book lay open beside her, its pages documenting years of preparation for this moment. But they still don't understand what they're actually facing. Her phone displayed updated thermal imaging from Thompson. The satellite feed showed the handler's remaining forces consolidating around the auction house's central structure, their movements revealing both professional training and growing desperation. Incoming aircraft, Tommy reported urgently. 3. Helicopters approaching from different vectors. Looks like some kind of emergency extraction attempt. Sarah tracked the aircraft through her scope, calculating new variables that would affect long-range ballistics. The evening air had created distinct temperature layers, each one influencing bullet trajectory in ways that she had spent decades learning to measure and predict. You know what most tactical operators never understand about competitive shooting? She asked, making precise notations. At extreme range, everything becomes interconnected. The same atmospheric conditions that affect bullet path also influence aircraft performance. Those helicopters, they're fighting the same wind layers, the same temperature gradients that I've spent years documenting. Her next shot demonstrated this principle with devastating precision. The bullet traveled for nearly 4 seconds, its path calculated through multiple atmospheric layers before striking the lead helicopter's tail rotor transmission with surgical accuracy. The aircraft didn't crash, it simply lost maneuverability, forced to make an emergency landing far from its intended extraction point. Primary air support was neutralized, Mitchell confirmed, remaining aircraft breaking off, implementing evasive protocols. Sarah was already adjusting her firing position, compensating for the subtle changes in wind patterns that occurred as the sun continued its descent. Her custom rifle, built to specifications that had helped her set multiple world records, required no electronic assistance to maintain deadly accuracy at these extreme ranges. Handler's security teams are attempting to establish new defensive positions, Tommy reported, monitoring their communications. They're implementing some kind of last resort protocol. Look at their formation, Sarah indicated, studying their movements through her scope. They're creating concentric defensive rings, each layer designed to absorb incoming fire, perfect tactical doctrine for conventional threats at standard engagement distances. Her phone chimed with new intelligence from Thompson. The satellite imagery showed the Handlers organization making one final attempt to salvage their operation, concentrating all remaining resources around their leader's position. You know what separates champions from tactical experts? Sarah asked, making new calculations in her range book. It's not skill or even experience. It's the understanding that at extreme range, precision shooting becomes pure mathematics. Every variable can be measured, every effect calculated, every outcome determined with absolute certainty. The sun's angle had created new challenges for long-range shooting, but Sarah had spent years preparing for exactly these conditions. Her range book contained detailed data about how atmospheric conditions changed during sunset, how temperature gradients shifted, how wind patterns evolved. Handlers moving to final secure position, Tommy reported. Maximum security protocols in effect. They're deploying everything they have left. Sarah watched through her scope as the Handlers' remaining forces established their last defense. Their movements spoke of extensive training, of countless operations conducted flawlessly. But they were still operating under traditional limitations, still believing in boundaries that didn't apply to competitive shooting at extreme range. Final phase initiating, she announced quietly. The evening light had painted the valley in shades of purple and gold, creating atmospheric conditions that most shooters would consider impossible for precision work. But for someone who had spent decades pushing the boundaries of competitive shooting, these conditions were simply variables in an equation. Her shot whispered across the valley, traveling through multiple temperature layers before striking the Handler's last defensive position with surgical precision. The bullet didn't cause catastrophic damage. It simply disabled specific components of their remaining security systems, transforming their technological protection into useless decoration. Primary target neutralized, Mitchell confirmed. All defensive systems were compromised, Handler's security teams implementing final surrender protocols. Through her specialized optics, Sarah watched as the realization spread through the Handlers' organization. All their tactical excellence, all their advanced technology, all their proven doctrine, none of it had prepared them for someone who treated extreme range shooting as an exact science. Local law enforcement moved in, coordinated by Mitchell's trusted deputies. The Handlers' criminal empire, built on intimidation and corruption, crumbled in the face of precisely calculated justice delivered from distances their tactical doctrine said were impossible. "You know what I learned in my last championship?" Sarah asked, watching as federal agents secured the facility. The difference between good shooters and champions isn't about talent or even technology. It's about understanding that at extreme range, everything becomes interconnected. Every atmospheric condition, every temperature variation, every wind current, they're all part of a unified mathematical equation. 3 weeks later, Sarah Anderson stood on her front porch, watching the sunrise paint Wind River Valley in shades of amber. The Handlers organization had been dismantled, their criminal network exposed, their corrupt officials brought to justice. The valley had been transformed, not just by the removal of a criminal enterprise, but by the demonstration that skill and precision could overcome any threat. Tommy Mitchell's voice crackled through her radio. He had taken over as the new head of security for the legitimate Ranchers Association, implementing protocols based on the lessons learned during their operation. Federal task force just finished their final sweep, he reported. Handler's entire network has been exposed. Criminal organizations across 3 states are abandoning their operations, afraid of facing more impossible shots. Sarah smiled, remembering the expressions on the federal agents' faces when they'd verified the distances of her shots. The Handlers' security teams had been equipped with the best technology, the finest tactical training, proven military doctrine, but they'd never understood what they were truly facing. Someone who had spent decades turning extreme range shooting into a mathematical certainty. "You know what most people never realize about precision?" she asked, scratching Scout behind the ears as the morning sun illuminated the peaks. "It's not about the shot itself. It's about understanding that everything is connected. The wind that carries a bullet also shapes the mountains. The temperature layers that affect trajectory also paint the sky. When you understand these connections, when you learn to read mathematics in nature itself, distance becomes irrelevant." Mitchell's truck appeared on the horizon, kicking up dust as it approached her ranch. The valley had changed in the past month, transformed not by violence, but by the demonstration that skill and precision could overcome any threat, that justice could be delivered from distances that tactical doctrine said were impossible. "Federal training programs want to interview you," Mitchell called out as he parked. "They're rewriting their long-range shooting protocols based on what happened here." Sarah shook her head, smiling. "They're still thinking tactically, still trying to turn this into standard military doctrine. They don't understand that competitive shooting at extreme range isn't about tactics or even technology. It's about turning physics into poetry, probability into certainty, impossible distances into mathematical precision." The morning sun caught something metallic in the distance, a new security team practicing at the valley's shooting range. But they weren't just learning marksmanship, they were learning what Sarah had discovered through decades of competition, that at extreme range everything becomes interconnected, that every variable can be measured, that precision isn't just about hitting targets. It's about understanding the mathematical poetry written in the wind and sky. Wind River Valley had been transformed, not just by the removal of a criminal organization, but by the demonstration that skill and precision could overcome any threat. The Handlers' empire, built on intimidation and corruption, had crumbled in the face of something they'd never understood. That at extreme range, a single skilled shooter who understands the mathematics of nature can control an entire battlefield. Sarah's range book lay open on her porch table, its pages filled with the calculations that had turned impossible shots into certainty. But it wasn't just a record of ballistic data. It was a testament to the truth she'd learned through decades of competitive shooting, That precision at extreme range isn't about defying physics, it's about understanding that everything in nature follows mathematical laws. That distance becomes irrelevant when you learn to read the equations written in the wind and light. The morning breeze carried the scent of sage and pine, telling stories about air density and temperature variations that most people would never notice. But for Sarah Anderson, retired champion and defender of Wind River Valley, these weren't just atmospheric conditions. They were reminders that in a world of chaos and corruption, precision and skill could still triumph, that justice could be delivered from distances that tactical doctrine said were impossible. "You know what separates champions from everyone else?" she asked, watching the sun illuminate the peaks. "It's not about the shots we make. It's about understanding that everything in nature is connected by mathematics. When you learn to read those equations, to calculate those connections, to turn chaos into certainty, that's when distance becomes meaningless, when impossible becomes inevitable, when precision becomes pure poetry." Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.